kính chào cha.
Đó là việc đây. Alo.
Alo.
Nghe, ok nghe. Mở nghe cha rồi.
Cha còn đó cha.
Con đó. Ok. Thôi được rồi ha. Bây giờ nói chuyện với cha đi nha. Khoảng 20 phút nữa thì chương trình bắt đầu ha. Ok, vậy cha ok rồi. Giúp nữa cha đó, cái gì con lên hình cha thôi. Okay.
Anh chuẩn bị mời quay.
Yes. Ê, tên là Quốc nha. Hả? Đúng rồi, cha lên trước rồi chị Bình sau. Giúp lên anh Diệp Nhiên anh sẽ ngồi ghế này. Okay. Anh Diệp Nhiên anh sẽ ngồi ở đây. Nhưng mà cha không Diệp Nhiên của cha là linh mục Nguyễn Lâm mà chưa có không để anh ý kiến một chút xíu nha. Bây giờ tụi em lo đi ha.
Trái Tâm tới rồi, Trái Tâm kìa.
Ồ, Trái Tâm đâu?
Trái Tâm ngồi kia.
Đó.
Mời Trái Tâm bên anh. Mời Trái Tâm ngồi đây này, ngồi giữa hai anh. Ngồi giữa hai anh đi. Trái Tâm ngồi giữa hai anh. Trái Tâm ngồi giữa hai anh. Ngồi giữa hai anh đi. Sắc để cha. Ngồi giữa. Dạ vâng, cha ngồi giữa.
Trái Tâm bây giờ Trái Tâm còn vài phút nữa nhưng mà bây giờ Trái Tâm sẽ
quay Trái Tâm.
Tâm định ha. Để cha có nghe tiếng của anh Linh Trái Tâm nha, cha sẽ nghe ha. Cha nữa bây giờ cha nói thì cha đang ở bên đây. Alo, cha nghe rõ không? Vâng,
Cha Tâm nghe đó cha, cha lợi nghe đó cha.
Cha rồi lắm. Ở đây nó nghe đây. Nó nghe cha nhưng mà cha là
anh phải nghe ngoài.
đây là mình học. Vâng, nghe rồi lắm. Nghe rồi lắm.
Cầm đuôi cái thôi không được đâu.
Đây, em cha rồi lắm. Nghe cha rồi lắm.
Cha lại nói bài cha bây giờ.
Nghe đó rồi. Nó thầy lên đây.
Xin giới thiệu anh là cha Lợi từ cha Khang Lợi từ
Cái chuyện đồng bào. Hôm nay để mà nhập công với chúng tôi và để cùng với chúng tôi bày tỏ những tình cảm của mình, những tình của mình của người Việt chúng ta tới hội Hoa Kỳ. Xin kính chào tất cả quý vị, cảm ơn sự nhiều của quý vị và xin chúc chúc lan cho tất cả quý vị. Alo, mình hay rõ này, không biết.
Alo, nghe rất rõ.
Alo,
Dây lại.
Em rất rõ nha.
Không đâu
bên rất rõ. Bên Tâm là lực quý vị bên đây rõ là
Tâm nhà rõ nhưng mà webcam của cha rất là mờ. Không thấy gì hết.
ở bên cái này cái việc ta mà trong phòng quốc hội thì tại sao bây giờ cũng chưa thầy lại đấy để tôi thảo thì sao tôi có thể đô nó có thể là thầy gương mà nó được phạt chiếu.
cho một
Hồi như thầy là đọc chưa? Alo.
Dạ chưa nha.
Cái này có thể là rồi không?
Dạ chưa.
Chưa hả? Là đây thì là rồi, thì đường truyền của Việt Nam là rồi.
Dạ con biết rồi.
Ở Việt Nam thì có cái đàn áp gọi là đàn áp gọi là bắt thứ gì cho thấy chứ không phải chứ đừng kể cả ở một là hai là dụ là
Quý Nam Môn sẽ gọi lại.
một là một thầy của thầy đấy còn
Âm thanh sẽ cao bị lắm.
Rất là đông đủ để theo dõi cuộc điều tra lần ngày hôm nay, thưa quý vị.
Trả lời con nghe rõ không cha?
vâng anh nói tôi bây giờ
Dạ.
là không nghe được không?
Dạ xin phỏng vấn cha chút tí xíu là bây giờ bên đó chúng ta là 1
Nghe
giờ
rõ.
sáng không cha?
Vâng.
Bên Huế bây giờ phải 1 giờ sáng.
Vâng, 1 giờ sáng rồi, bây giờ là 12 giờ 51 phút. 12 giờ 51 phút sắp chuyển sang là 1 giờ này mới là
Như vậy thì khi cha nói như vậy thì cha có nghĩ là chính quyền
cái gì?
cha
Cái
nghĩ
gì
chính
đó?
quyền đang theo dõi cha hay là có những người nào đưa ra bên ngoài không cha?
Thì đương nhiên giờ phút này thì là con đang lên là trên gác á, đang lên trên gác không phải ngồi không dưới thằng ra nhưng mà đây là cái gác á, động của kiện này lấy từ tính là kêu lên phải lấy giấy mà dán chính ra rồi là giấy mà dán chính thì bên ngoài ảnh sáng nó cũng nổi ra bên ngoài rồi. Thì phải lễ phong thôi là ngồi ví dụ là nó là cái nó là đối đá vào là đặt nó bề ngoài cho mình phải tốn công và sửa lại lễ phong phải sức.
Như vậy mấy ngày nay tin tức ở trên có lẽ trên internet cũng như hệ thống truyền thông truyền hình có nói về cái việc kiểm tra của cha ngày hôm nay trước ủy ban nhân quyền ông Santos thì mấy ngày vừa rồi thì cha có bị chính quyền
nhiều lắm.
dạ cha có bị chính quyền làm khó dễ hay là có ai tới nói chuyện
Nhiều lắm vừa rồi thì không họ cách đây 4 ngày thì nó có gặp một ông cha bà. Ông cha này là chuyên ông là chở con đi chở khi nào đi đâu thì là giờ ông chở thôi. Thì nó gặp ông gọi ông lấy đồ công an là nó hỏi là nói rằng là ông cháu lời cái có việc kia về hợp đồng cũng lời không. Vậy cha là không thôi là thì xuống là cho lời này khi nào anh em đi với nhau hoặc là đi họp hoặc là đi mà việc gì đó còn tôi cũng biết cho lời không cũng theo dõi việc làm của cháu
rằng tôi có thể đẩy được ít giờ đến cuối năm này. Tí nữa đây đúng 4 giờ thì có một cái phái đoàn
Trả lời register xin cha.
cái văn phòng đại diện mật của Hoa Kỳ.
Trả lời register. Chắc cha sao là trả lời không con gặp. Trả lời tôi rồi.
vâng bây giờ mình để chuẩn bị thì cha bây giờ mình chuẩn bị điều tra bây giờ mình tạm nói chuyện chút xíu.
Vâng, anh đi mong là bên đó thầy được thầy nói được không được có là thầy thì cha thầy
Chúng ta có tầm vài phút đồng hồ, 5 phút đồng hồ nữa chúng ta sẽ bắt đầu
Em chụp cho anh.
Send you my report.
No, no.
Are you still
I'm
AOL?
same address. Same
Hearing will be streamed.
We even have a I tried to share
Dạ vâng, dạ tôi là linh mục Phạm Hữu Tâm từ Houston và đang hiện diện trong cái phòng điều trần của Tom Lantos Human Rights, tức là Tom Lantos, Ủy ban Nhân quyền. Xin kính chào tất cả quý vị. Dạ vâng,
Some of the punchings, crimes we've been involved in. I'll end up sending you a copy of your email address. Otherwise,
Nhân là người vận động cho vấn đề nhân quyền, tự do tôn giáo và nhân quyền ở Việt Nam. Trong phòng hội của buổi điều trần năm nay đó thì tối đa chứa được khoảng đâu 200 người thôi. Có rất là nhiều người muốn vào để nghe buổi điều trần này, bởi vì nghe được những vị tôn giáo ở Việt Nam có thể điều trần trực tiếp với lại Quốc hội Hoa Kỳ ở đây, cho nên khá nhiều người muốn vào nghe, nhưng mà tuy nhiên phòng nhỏ cho nên chúng tôi phải chia nhau một số người
đến rất là nhiều vào khi mà Bộ Ngoại giao Hoa Kỳ đang chuẩn bị để cho ra bản phúc trình về tự do tôn giáo thế giới, trong khi Việt Nam về mặt thương mại thì rất hy vọng được chấp thuận để trở thành một đối tác thương mại xuyên Thái Bình Dương TPP, thưa quý vị. Và với cái nỗ lực của những đoàn thể người Việt Nam ở hải ngoại, trong đó có tự do, có tôn giáo, có nhân quyền và các tinh thần nhân sĩ ở tại các địa bàn khác về, thì đây là một cơ hội quan trọng để đẩy lùi TPP, cũng như một lần nữa nói với luật pháp cũng như luật pháp của Hoa Kỳ rằng Việt Nam thiếu tự do tôn giáo, và đó là điều Việt Nam cần phải cải thiện để tăng cường tiếng bạc già để hai quốc gia tham dự tường trình của Quốc hội.
To everyone, I want to announce there won't be as many members here at the outset, because there's a vote going to go on. I'm going to miss the votes because I know many of you have come from far away. And I want to thank all the witnesses. I want to thank my staff, Elise from my staff, who have done a great job, and my other staff members here. And I want to thank the Vietnamese community for their efforts and to really, make a difference. So hopefully this can be the beginning of where we just do dramatic things to change what is taking place in Vietnam. And lastly, I also want to thank all the witnesses that we have. I'm pleased to join others in the Vietnamese American community who have journeyed to Washington from across the country for this hearing on the persecution of religious and indigenous communities in Vietnam and related advocacy activities. I want to thank also former Congressman Justin Gao and Dr. Tong, with both people, SOS, for their faithful and passionate advocacy work to promote human rights for the people in Vietnam and for their efforts to engage the broader Vietnamese diaspora community. We owe a great debt of gratitude to them. I understand some of the audience have traveled from as far away as Canada and Europe. Is that who is from Canada? Okay, great. Who is from Europe? Wow, that's impressive. This is a testament, I think, to your deep concern about the ongoing abuses of human rights and religious freedom in Vietnam. The recent United Nations Universal Periodic Review found that the Vietnamese government continues to harass and detain those who attempt to exercise universal rights and freedoms, such as the freedom of expression and freedom of association. The Vietnamese government strictly regulates and monitors the activities of religious organizations while cracking down on churches that are not registered. Similarly, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom 2013 annual report showed that the Vietnamese government continues to imprison individuals for conducting religious activities. The Vietnamese government utilized a specialized religious police force and vague national security laws to suppress independent religious activities. Furthermore, the Vietnamese government aims to halt the growth of Protestantism and Catholicism within the ethnic minority groups through discrimination, intimidation, violence, and forced renunciation of their faith. The U.S. Department of State, against the repeated recommendations of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and Congress, removed Vietnam from the list of countries of particular concern in 2006. Given the systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of human rights and religious freedom in Vietnam, as we will undoubtedly hear today, the Department's decision, and let me make it clear, both in the previous administration and this administration, to remove Vietnam's designation is a mistake. In fact, the Obama administration issued CPC designations only once during the first term, and the critical post of ambassador at large remains unfulfilled. Maybe Mr. Schmidt will have to take that job. Today, I'm pleased that we will hear from USERF about the true state of religious freedom in Vietnam. In addition to USERF, I'd like to thank our other witnesses for joining us today, 2 in person and 2 from afar. The testimony will greatly inform this hearing. For the first time, a commission hearing will include witnesses testifying directly from Vietnam. I'd like to thank these individuals for their great courage and willingness to provide first-hand accounts of the current situation in Vietnam. We understand that one of the witnesses, her house has been now surrounded, as we now speak here, by the police. While I'm looking forward to hearing these bold voices, I would also like to ask everyone to be patient should any technical difficulty or any other problems arise during their testimony. I also think it's important to note that I intend to send a letter to Ambassador Scheer in Vietnam, urging him to meet with these 2 courageous individuals, hear their stories, and closely monitor their situation in the days and weeks following the hearing, thereby making it clear to the government of Vietnam that the safety and well-being of these religious leaders is of paramount concern to the Congress and to the United States government. As today's hearings unfold, it is my hope that tangible recommendations will emerge for ways in which the U.S. government can better advocate for and champion religious freedom and related human rights in Vietnam. There are obvious steps that can be taken. Filling the post of ambassador at large for international religious freedom and redesignating Vietnam as a CPC country. And I think there are some names circulating. One name that I've heard, I will not say it because sometimes that's not a good thing to do, but it is an outstanding appointment. But we hope that what I've heard takes place. But there's much more that can be done and must be done. Religious freedom, America's first freedom. The fact is, we should make religious freedom, not just in Vietnam, but in China, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Egypt. It should be the human rights issue of our time. It should be no candidate running for office, whether as Republican or Democrat, ought to be able to go anywhere without being quizzed and asked. No congressman, R or D. R stands for Republican, D for Democrat. Ought to be able to go anywhere in the 2014 elections, and certainly by the 2016 elections, without saying what their position is. How are they going to deal with these issues? How are they going to deal with anti-Semitism? How are they going to deal with the issue with regard to Vietnam? What are they going to do with regard to China? What are they going to do? Every person running for office. And so it is my hope that we can literally make this issue the human rights issue of our time, religious freedom. America's first freedom must be a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy and not relegated to a back burner as has been done some time in previous administrations. Our first witness is Mr. Eric Schwartz, Dean of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. He's had a distinguished career prior to joining the Humphrey School. He spent 25 years in senior positions at the State Department, the National Security Council, the United Nations, and the U.S. Congress, and in the NGO community. From 2009 to 2011, he was U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Refugees, and Migration. From 1986 to 1989, he served as Washington Director of the Asia Division of Human Rights Watch. He was a member of the Board of Directors of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. The second, we can wait. I'll introduce the second, but why don't we just go with that? Sir, thank you for coming. Mr. Schwartz, we are very, very grateful for your coming.
Thank you very much. There we go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today and for inviting me to testify on behalf of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. I'll speak for 5 or 6 minutes, but I ask that my written statement be submitted for the record. It is a pleasure for me to be here today. As I indicated in my written testimony, I've worked on human rights and humanitarian issues for some 30 years in the human rights community, at the National Security Council, in the White House, at the State Department, at the United Nations. But my first major writing project as a human rights advocate back in the mid-1980s, well before probably most of your staff were born, was on human rights in Vietnam. And I've dealt with humanitarian issues, refugee issues, and human rights issues in Vietnam at many points in my own career, especially while on Capitol Hill and at the White House. I also want to recognize the witnesses appearing after me, especially Father Phan Bang Loy and Ms. Nguyen Bat Pham, who are testifying from Vietnam. Their accounts will, no doubt, underscore the imperative of religious freedom and other rights. The rights of people to think as they please, believe or not believe as their conscience so dictates, and live out their lives and beliefs openly, peacefully, and without fear. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom previously has testified on Vietnam, each time hoping to report that there has been overall progress. I regret that I can't report such progress today, given continued limitations in Vietnam on religious freedom, on privacy rights, on freedom of assembly, association, and freedom of movement. The government of Vietnam controls each religious community through law and administrative oversight, severely restricts independent practice of religion, represses individuals and groups it views as challenging its authority, and imprisons dozens for religious activity or advocacy on behalf of religious freedom. These and other issues, these prisoners of conscience are included in the Lantos Commission's Defending Freedom's project, on which the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and Amnesty International USA are proud to collaborate and are noted in my written testimony. Vietnam's government uses a specialized religious police force, Công Nang Tong Giao, and vague national security laws to suppress independent Buddhist, Protestant, Qua, Khao, and Cao Dai activities, and has aggressively opposed the growth of adherence to the Protestant and Catholic faiths among ethnic minorities through discrimination, violence, and forced renunciation of faith. Religious believers and religious freedom activists continue to be jailed. Police forcibly close the venues of independent religious groups. Legal protections for religious groups are subject to arbitrary or discriminatory interpretation, and ethnic minority converts to Protestantism and Catholicism face discrimination, intimidation, and pressure to renounce their faith. Now, Vietnam did make some important and encouraging changes in the last decade, but they do stand in stark contrast to today's violations. We believe these developments, the encouraging ones, resulted in some measure from U.S. diplomatic efforts following Washington's designation of Vietnam from 2004 to 2006 as a country of particular concern for systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. And I think I should emphasize that this designation appears not to have disrupted productive diplomatic progress on other issues in the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. In fact, it arguably created another opportunity for engagement and dialogue. So, what do we think the United States should be doing? Given Vietnam's record, we should link, of course, expanded relations with improved human rights and religious freedom conditions. Human rights should be pursued at each level of the relationship, including in the context of new military and trade agreements that are being negotiated. In its 2013 annual report, our commission urged that Vietnam be designated as a country of particular concern. And given current conditions, it's hard to imagine a different recommendation in this year's forthcoming report. The Commission also recommends the following. Continue to highlight the issue of religious and other prisoners of conscience in Vietnam. Augment new funds appropriated to expand bilateral economic or security relations. We should also provide new funding for efforts to encourage human rights and religious freedom, and urge that funding from the State Department's Human Rights and Democracy Fund be set aside for new programming in these areas. Members of Congress should support the Vietnam Human Rights Act, H.R. 1897, and companion bill S. 1649, and the Fostering of Rights Through Economic Engagement in Vietnam Act, H.R. 1682. Now, our Commission has also supported measures that would impose sanctions on individual rights abusers. And we note that this is the approach reflected in the Vietnam Human Rights Sanctions Act, H.R. 4254. Congress and the administration has acted in this kind of manner, these individual sanctions, to good effect in other parts of the world. Congress should work with the administration to encourage the accessibility of our has expressed support for both the CPC designation and legislation like this is because it's a fundamental part of this truth-telling exercise, and frankly, it's also a fundamental part of who we are.
Well, I agree. I guess the question I have is how do we, who's the Jackson and who's the Vance, who's the Senator Jackson, who's the Ronald Reagan, and I think I just tell the Vietnamese community this has to literally become the model is what Senator Jackson did. And if you recall, I don't know when you came to town, when Secretary Schultz used to go over to Russia, he would meet with the refuseniks. He would meet with their families in the embassy. That's not going to happen now, but he would meet with their families in the embassy, or he would even go up to 5 floors and go in and have a cup of tea with them, to be with them. And I think the failure is, and I say, if anything is that, the Vietnamese community literally should learn from the Jewish community in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, you need people like Scoop Jackson, who is a Democrat, because this is not a political R or D, and you need people like Reagan. And I think so. That is really what you're going to have to do. And I believe, I appreciate what the commission, has said and what the commission has done. But I think when I see Chris Smith, who probably has 3 Vietnamese in his district, who worked so hard to get this passed, and then I see a Republican senator and a Democratic senator blocking it.
Well, if I can say one other thing, the other advantage of having an assertive policy on human rights and a willingness to raise these issues publicly, consistently, forthrightly, in ways that often create a fair amount of discomfort. The advantage of doing that on a repeated basis, in addition to moving the ball forward, in addition to keeping faith with those who are suffering, it also communicates to other governments that this is going to be a regular part of our interactions, of our diplomatic relations, of our public diplomacy. So when you actually do it, the prospect of doing it becomes less daunting, because other governments, in terms of the potential risk in bilateral relations, because other governments understand that this is something we are going to do, time and again, in a consistent, on a consistent basis as a regular part of our diplomatic interactions. That becomes the norm, and it's an important one. And I think advocates within government and advocates outside of government have to continue to push on that, as the Commission on International Religious Freedom does and is doing.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sharansky has told me that his life got better when people advocated for him when he was in the Gulag. And I'm not going to ask, but is the Washington Post here? Is the New York Times here? Is the Chicago Trib here? Is the LA Times here? And I think literally this has to become, these issues have to become, the human rights issues anyway, one other question I want to ask you. What do you think members of Congress can do?
Well, I think there are a number of actions. First, as I said in my testimony, it's hard to imagine that the Commission on International Religious Freedom would not make a recommendation on behalf of a designation of Vietnam as a country of particular concern. And I think that the congressional support for that, advocacy for that, to me seems to make a lot of sense. And that's one thing members of Congress can do. You can also support the Vietnam Human Rights Act and the Fostering Rights Through Economic Engagement in Vietnam Act. Both of those measures, I emphasize, don't dictate exactly what the administration, what the president needs to do diplomatically. but they do send a very, very strong message. So I would argue that that legislation doesn't tie the administration's hand, but creates opportunities for progress on human rights. I've mentioned the Human Rights Sanctions Act as well, which the Commission in the past has supported. That kind of individual targeted sanctions measure, and it's been used by the Congress and the administration to great effect in other parts of the world. So those are three pieces of legislation. I think that the Congress should continue to exercise its to work with the administration to encourage a readiness to use authority to accept refugees facing a well-founded fear of persecution in this in this priority 1 category, which is a category in our refugee law that is used in
panel, they would come up together and what we'll have will be Father Ron Roy, the Catholic priest and the lead member of the Win priest group. This group is composed of Catholic priests who speak out for social justice. He was a prisoner of conscience, serving 7 years in prison, and currently is the chief editor of the electronic journal entitled Freedom of Speech. Recently, he co-founded the Association of Vietnamese Former Prisoners of Conscience. Next will be Sub-Dignitary Nguyen Van Phung, holy member of the Cao Di, religious sect that is independent from the religious governance council set up by the Vietnamese government. I believe she's the one who has surrounded her house by the police. She has led Cao Di follows in resisting the takeover of the sect by the governance council and has therefore been harassed constantly by the authorities. She has filed several reports of abuse by the government to different United Nations agencies, and we hope, is there anybody here from the State Department? Nobody from the State Department here? Would you, when you go back, call the ambassador, tell her that one of the witnesses who we were going to have, her house was surrounded, and if he could go visit her or bring her in so that he sends a message to the Vietnamese government that we care, but that our government cares, and if you could also talk to the father to make sure that he could protect it. Okay, thank you very much. Next will be Attorney Uni Han, in charge of advocacy at the National Amongst Development based in Washington, D.C. She tracks the situation among Christians in Vietnam and those seeking asylum in Thailand. She's spoken out against the Vietnam persecution among Christians. Attorney Han was previously an asylum lawyer with Legal Aid Foundation out of Los Angeles. We welcome you. Last, Mr. Ron Day, Executive Director of the Montagnard Human Rights Organization based in North Carolina. In 1976, he made a daring escape. I read about it. They should make a movie about it. From one of Vietnam's re-education camps and stayed in hiding in the jungle for over 11 years. 11 years before reaching Cambodia. He's been a leader among the Montagnard community in the U.S. and a consistent advocate for human rights and religious freedom in this community. First, we'll go Father.
Vâng, xin mời.
Xin mời cha bắt đầu lên tiếng. Xin mời cha bắt đầu lên tiếng.
Vâng. Kính thưa toàn thể quý vị, tôi thật lòng xin lỗi quý vị vì không thể đến Hoa Kỳ để hiện diện trong căn phòng này trước mặt toàn thể quý vị. Lý do là tôi đã bị nhà cầm quyền Cộng sản Việt Nam quản thúc và thường xuyên theo dõi từ hơn 10 năm nay. Mong quý vị thông cảm. Xin cảm ơn.
Distinguished members, ladies and gentlemen, first I would like to apologize for not being present
in person because the government has placed me under surveillance and restricted my movement, especially in the past 10 years. So first, accept my apology for not being present with you today. Like that.
Kính thưa toàn thể quý vị, nhân việc Ủy ban Nhân quyền Tom tổ chức buổi điều trần về vai trò của các tổ chức tôn giáo trong xây dựng xã hội dân sự ở Việt Nam, chúng tôi xin có bài điều trần nhỏ như sau.
On occasion that Tom Lantos Human Rights Committee organizes hearing on the role of religious organization in building the civil society in Vietnam, I would like to offer a brief testimony as follows.
Số 1. Những thuận lợi của các tổ chức công giáo trong vai trò xây dựng xã hội dân sự. Giáo hội Công giáo về cơ cấu giáo phận, giáo xứ, dòng tu và các tổ chức bên trong từng cơ cấu là những xã hội dân sự với nhiều thuận lợi trong vai trò xây dựng xã hội quốc gia. Tại Việt Nam từ năm 1975 đã có những tổ chức giáo dục như Hướng đạo Công giáo, Thanh Sinh Công, Thanh Lao Công, trường thiện như Caritas, Nigeria, xã hội như phong trào công lý hòa bình, phong trào chống tham nhũng, ủy ban cải thiện chế độ lao tù, v.v.
First, the favorable factors of Catholic organization in building civil society. The Catholic Church, with its existing structure in the form of dioceses, parishes, religious committee, and different committees, can play favorable roles and beneficial role in building society and country. Before 1975, in the south of Vietnam, there existed many organizations such as Catholic Scouts, Catholic Student and Youth Movement, Catholic Youth Workers, charity organizations such as Caritas, social organizations such as Movement on Justice and Peace, Movement Against Corruption, Committee on Improving Prison Conditions.
Số 2. Những hạn chế và khó khăn mà những tổ chức này đang phải đối đầu trong sinh hoạt công giáo và thực thi sứ mạng phục vụ nhân quyền xã hội. Sau năm 1975, khi Cộng sản lên nắm chính quyền và xây dựng chế độ vô thần độc tài toàn trị, thì những tổ chức nói trên phải ngưng hoạt động. Chỉ còn lại cơ cấu điều hành ở các giáo phận, giáo xứ và dòng tu thôi, nhưng họ luôn luôn bị theo dõi và lũng đoạn. Nhiều giám mục, linh mục, tu sĩ và giáo dân đi tù. Hiện nay thì vài tổ chức dân sự đang cố gắng phục hồi và sinh hoạt âm thầm như Hướng đạo, là Công giáo, cơ qua và Caritas, Ủy ban Công lý Hòa bình. Một số chức sắc đứng ra thành lập nhóm linh mục người Kim
In the South and built an atheist, dictatorial, totalitarian government, all of the above social organizations stopped functioning. There remain only operational structure internal to dioceses, parishes, religious orders, but they have always been spied on and interfered with in their functions. Many bishops, priests, religious, and lay people were imprisoned. At the present time, a few social organizations try to recover and work quietly. For example, Catholic Scouts, Caritas Charity, Committee on Justice and Peace. A number of Catholic religious leaders organized a group called Nguyễn Kim Điền Priest Group to combat for religious freedom, democracy, and human rights since 2001, and some participates in the Vietnam Interfaith Council. Mời Jack.
We cannot hear you if you are over there. So now everything is working back to normal. So you come back here, please, Father. Cảm ơn cha. Tiếp tục nha.
Các tổ chức dân sự đó hoạt động về mặt lý thuyết lẫn thực hành. Về mặt lý thuyết, Hội đồng Giám mục Việt Nam từng có thư góp ý với nhà nước, kiến nghị gửi Thủ tướng và Ban Tôn giáo, thư ngọt gửi cho các cơ quan lập pháp Việt Nam quan điểm về một số vấn đề trong hiện tình xã hội, và mới nhất là thư nhận định và góp ý sửa đổi là hiến pháp. Ủy ban Công lý Hòa bình thì tổ chức các khóa học cho giáo dân về học thuyết xã hội tôn giáo, nghiên cứu nhiều vấn đề chính trị, kinh tế, xã hội và nhân quyền tại Việt Nam, lên tiếng hình phạt về vài vụ việc bất công trong xã hội.
These civil society organizations are active in both theory and in practice. In theory, the Conference of Catholic Bishops of Vietnam sent recommendation letters to the government, petitions to the Prime Minister and Central Committee on Religious Affairs, open letters to legislative offices, viewpoints on certain social issues, and most recently, viewpoints about the state of Vietnam's society and recommended amendments to the Vietnamese Constitution. The Committee on Justice and Peace organized teaching sessions for the faithful on Catholic social doctrines, research on political, economic, social, human rights issues in Vietnam, and occasionally voice again injustice in society. Protection Group in the Diocese of Quyền, the Catholic Media Group, and the Justice and Peace Office of the Redemptor's Order, all three, have had many activities relating to the media and society.
Thế nhưng tất cả những lần lên tiếng trên không bao giờ được nhà cầm quyền Việt Nam hồi đáp một cách nghiêm chỉnh. Trả lại họ còn tìm cách gây khó khăn. Chẳng hạn Tổng giám mục Ngô Quang Kiệt bị bứng ra khỏi tòa Tổng giám mục Hà Nội. Giám mục Hồ Đức Oanh bị trách nhiệm. Dòng chữ của Thế luôn bị theo dõi và cản trở trong các hoạt động. Nhiều linh mục và giáo dân đang bị ngồi tù vì lên tiếng cho công lý và sự thật.
However, all those statements and activities never received a serious response from the government of Vietnam. On the contrary, the government created more difficulties and obstacles. For example, our Bishop Ngô Quang Kiệt was removed from the Archdiocese of Hanoi. Bishop Hoàng Đức Oanh was harassed. The Redemptor's community has always been spied on and prohibited in activities. Many priests and lay people are in prison for speaking out for justice and truth.
Đang khi đó thì các hoạt động thực tiễn của Công giáo bị hạn chế hay cấm cản bởi pháp lệnh tôn giáo thì người ủng hộ người định áp dụng pháp lệnh đó. Hai văn kiện này muốn khống chế kềm tỏa 5 phương diện hay 5 yếu tố của tôn giáo là quy chế pháp lý, nhân sự, hoạt động, tài sản và quan hệ quốc tế. Nghĩa là cho đến nay, các tôn giáo và các tổ chức tôn giáo không được nhà nước công nhận như những pháp nhân. Nhân sự lãnh đạo luôn bị nhà nước kiểm soát từ việc chiêu mộ, huấn luyện, tấn phong đến bổ nhiệm. Các hoạt động thuần chủ nghĩa tôn giáo hoặc phục vụ xã hội đều phải xin phép, bị hạn chế không cho vươn ảnh hưởng ra ngoài xã hội. Tài sản giáo hội tiếp tục bị tước đoạt thêm, hồ đất đai thì giáo hội chỉ được quyền sử dụng. Quan hệ quốc tế của giáo hội và việc các chính sách lập tín đồ ra hải ngoại đều bị nhà nước kiểm soát, có khi ngăn cản. Điều đó làm cho các tổ chức xã hội dân sự trong tôn giáo khó hoạt động và khó ảnh hưởng. Ngoài ra, nhà cầm quyền còn tạo nên một xã hội dân sự giả tạo là Ủy ban Đoàn kết Công giáo, thành viên của Mặt trận Tổ quốc, nhằm lũng đoạn nội bộ giáo hội, đồng thời lừa gạt quốc tế.
In the meantime, many practical activities of the Catholic Church are limited or forbidden by the Ordinance on Religion and Belief and the Decree on the Ordinance Implementation. These two documents aim to prohibit and limit 5 aspects or elements of religious activities, namely legal status, personnel, activities, properties, and international relationship. That means up to this point, religion and religious organizations are not recognized as legal entities. Leadership personnel has always been controlled by the government from recruitment activities, formation, ordination, and assignment. All purely religious activities and social services must have the permission of the government or restricted and prohibited from extending their influence to the outside society. Properties of the Catholic Church have been increasingly confiscated. Land can only be used but not owned by the church. International relationship of the church and the travel abroad of the church members and clergy members are strictly controlled by the government, sometimes prohibited. As a result, it is difficult for faith-based civil society organization to function. Initially, the government created a fake civil society organization, namely the Committee for Solidarity of Vietnamese Catholics, a member of the Fatherland Front, to manipulate the internal affairs of the Catholic Church and deceive the outside world. Xin mời cha.
Đối với các tôn giáo khác thì nhà cầm quyền tạo ra những giáo hội quốc doanh bên cạnh các giáo hội chính truyền. Các giáo hội quốc doanh này do nhà nước điều khiển nhằm mục đích lũng đoạn chia rẽ các giáo hội chính truyền. Các giáo hội quốc doanh ấy cũng tham gia mặt trận tổ quốc là cơ quan ngoại vi của Đảng Cộng sản, bao gồm trong đó các tổ chức xã hội dân sự giá tạo.
With regard to other religions, the government has created the state-controlled churches side by side, the Orthodox and traditional churches. These state-controlled churches are directed by the government with the purpose of manipulating and dividing the traditional churches. These state-controlled churches also participate in the Fatherland Front, serving as peripheral entities of the Communist Party. The Fatherland Front consists of synthetic civil society organizations.
Số 3, những dự định sẽ thực hiện trong 12 tháng tới để thay đổi tình trạng này. Trước hết, các chức sắc tôn giáo, trong đó có các linh mục, quy tụ trong Hội đồng Liên tôn ngày 1 tháng 5 2013 đã mạnh mẽ đòi Quốc hội phải chấp thuận một hiến pháp đề cao các dân quyền và nhân quyền. Đến ngày 4 tháng 10 năm 2013, chúng tôi đã mạnh mẽ phản bác pháp lệnh tôn giáo và nghị định áp dụng pháp lệnh đó. Mới đây, ngày 17 tháng 2 năm 2014, chúng tôi đã ra bản lễ tiết về quyền con người và về các tù nhân lương tâm tại Việt Nam. Chúng tôi rồi đây sẽ soạn thảo quyết định của Hội đồng Liên tôn để có thể chính danh và giảm chỉ hoạt động. Nhiều chức sắc tôn giáo từng bị lao tù trong chế độ cộng sản, trong đó có bản thân chúng tôi cũng vừa liên kết với nhau thành một tổ chức dân sự mang tên là Hội Cựu Tù Nhân Lương Tâm nhằm góp phần phá vỡ ách độc tài của chế độ.
The third point is on the intentions for implementation over 12 months to change the current conditions. Religious leaders, including many Catholic priests, who gathered on May 1st, 2013, under the Vietnam Interfaith Council, strongly demanded the National Assembly to adopt a constitution that values citizen rights and human rights. On October the 4th, 2013, we strongly refuted the Ordinance on Religion and Belief and related decree on its implementation. Recently, on February the 17th, 2014, we issued a statement on human rights and prisoners of conscience in Vietnam. We will soon prepare the bylaws for the Vietnam Interfaith Council so that we can rightly and boldly function. Many religious leaders.
We have a letter, a bipartisan letter, asking Harry Reid to bring the bill up or down in terms of a vote, but up or down on the Vietnam Human Rights Act. And again, thank you for your extraordinary leadership.
Xin chào ông dân biểu Chris Smith vừa mới vào phòng và ông đã tới phòng trễ, nhưng mà ông rất là xúc động, cũng như ông rất impressed về cái việc điều hành của cha. Và ông như cha biết là vừa rồi thì cái đạo luật đã thông qua Hạ viện rồi, chỉ có 9 người là chỉ có không có bỏ phiếu. Tuy nhiên hy vọng là cái tình trạng nhân quyền ở Việt Nam sẽ được cải tiến.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair,
an honor for me to be here to listen to the testimony of so many brave men and women. I represent the largest Vietnamese American community in the United States. I see the tremendous diversity within the community. I am also, living in the United States, fortunate to have the human rights and live in a society that respects diversity and our rich cultural and religious diversity. As a member of this commission, I have also adopted a prisoner of conscience, Mr. Win Tien Trung. Trung is a blogger and an activist who, as we know, was arrested in July of 2009, sentenced to 7 years in jail in 2010. And his case, I think, highlights the importance of why we're here to talk about a free and fair press in Vietnam. Recently, I just became aware that Vietnam is now ranked 174th out of 180 nations. So it's below Iran. There are only 6 countries in the world that have more terrible human rights violations than Vietnam. And so it's an honor to listen to everyone. The question I have is, we're so interested, a lot of the bloggers have been arrested because of their internet and other new technologies. And I want to know how, not only in terms of the arrest, but when people are using the internet, how has it impacted the larger population in Vietnam? Are there ways in which that the use of the internet has been very beneficial? I know that people begin to get arrested for using it, but I would like to know how people perceive that role and how it can play in kind of bringing about religious and freedom in Vietnam.
Are you addressing the
Yes.
question to the speaker?
Yes.
Vâng, tôi biết là gần đây thì có nhiều người tranh đấu tranh chủ nhân quyền Việt Nam mà sử dụng internet bị bắt bớ, thì tôi muốn biết là cái việc mà cấm đoán sử dụng internet nó ảnh hưởng tới những người quần chúng ở Việt Nam chung như thế nào? Xin mời cha Phan lại.
Kính thưa quý vị, thì ở tại Việt Nam này là nhà nước vừa dùng luật pháp, vừa dùng những cái biện pháp kỹ thuật để mà ngăn chặn internet. Trên phương diện luật pháp, họ đã ra cái nghị định 72 để mà kiểm soát internet, và trong thực tế thì họ dùng rất nhiều bức tường nữa để ngăn cản người dân vào các trang mạng đấu tranh.
In Vietnam, the government has issued the Ordinance 72 and also used many firewall to prevent the people from using internet.
And has it had a tremendous impact, Decree 72, on suppressing the rights of people to speak out?
Như vậy thì cái nghị định 72, nghị quyết 72 đó nó có ảnh hưởng tới nhiều người và nó ngăn cản nhiều người dù sử dụng internet không cha?
Vâng, nó ngăn cản nhiều người, tức là ngăn cản quần chúng truy cập cả cái trang internet. Nhưng mà đối với những người nào mà không có sợ hãi thì cái nghị định đó là vô nghĩa, chẳng hạn đối với chúng tôi.
Yes, this affects many other people from using internet. However, this Ordinance 72, it may not affect the people who are not afraid of using internet for human rights fight, just like myself.
Thank you.
Father Lloyd, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate your courage and your bravery, and we have asked the representative here of the State Department to make sure that our ambassador contacts you to make sure that you have not been harassed with regard to appearing here today before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Cảm ơn cha rất nhiều đã điều trần hôm nay, và chúng tôi sẽ liên lạc với lại đại sứ ở Việt Nam để bảo đảm là cha không có bị hành hung cũng như không có bị làm khó dễ vì cái việc điều hành của cha hôm nay.
Also, Congressman
Xin cảm ơn quý vị và xin cảm ơn tổ đại sứ của Hoa Kỳ ở tại Việt Nam.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you, the embassy in Vietnam.
Okay, Congressman Smith wants to say
I'm
one.
sorry, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for indulging me. Father Lloyd, when we met in December of 2005, again, I was just amazed at your lack of malice and your love even for those who persecute in the Vietnamese government. Can you tell us, because there is a false narrative, in my opinion, that things have been improving in Vietnam, and obviously since the signing of the bilateral agreement, that has been proven to be demonstrably false, but you live there, you live in Hue. What is your view as to whether or not the trend line, whether or not things are getting better or worse? I would note parenthetically that I did meet with Archbishop Kiet in Hanoi, and as you point out in your testimony, he is no longer there, been removed. But is it getting worse or better?
Can you repeat the first part of your question?
Yes, we had met in December of 2005 in Hue. Has it gotten better or worse in terms of religious freedom since we were last together?
Thưa cha Phan Văn Lợi, thì Congressman Chris Smith nói là đã gặp cha ngày tháng 12 năm 2005 và muốn hỏi cha là cái tình trạng mà tự do tôn giáo ở Việt Nam bây giờ nó được tốt hơn hay là nó tệ hơn với lại cái tình trạng mà ông gặp cha năm 2005?
Trước hết thì cho tôi xin được là kính chào dân Việt Chris Smith, và tôi đã hân hạnh đặt tại Việt Nam. Về cái tình trạng tôn giáo tại Việt Nam thì bây giờ nó càng lúc nó càng tồi tệ hơn. Các tôn giáo là tiếp tục bị đàn áp. Mới đây là đã có cái sự đàn áp rất mạnh liệt đối với tín đồ Phật giáo Hòa Hảo trong cái ngày lễ là Đức Huỳnh giáo chủ của họ bị Việt Minh xài. Xin chào chị.
First of all, thank you, and I'm very glad that we agreed again. My answer is that the condition of religions in Vietnam is always getting worse, and that the religion in Vietnam has been more persecuted. For example, just recently, the Hòa Hảo Buddhists was persecuted on the day that they celebrate the memorial of their leader, Huỳnh giáo chủ.
In many capacities over the years, who is an outstanding advocate for human rights, and we very much appreciate you being here and all the work that you do. This hearing is important for all of us because the human rights situation in Vietnam has deteriorated since the last time the Commission met to discuss this in 2012. And so public discontent and critical commentary have grown, fueled by the lack of basic freedoms and growing corruption, and the Vietnamese government's increased efforts to silence critical voices with a heavy hand. And many peaceful activists have received long prison terms for exposing government corruption, protesting expropriation of lands, and calling for freedom and dignity for all of Vietnam, regardless of their ethnic origin or religious affiliation. And we saw several of these family members of these prisoners. We've talked to many of them, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this hearing, because we want the government of Vietnam to know that we are taking note of this, that we are horrified by the human rights situation, and we're going to focus attention on it. So having said that, I now want to introduce our next witness, Subdignitary Nguyen Bat Phong, is a clergy member of the Cao Dai religious sect that is independent from the Religious Governance Council set up by the Vietnamese government. She has led Cao Dai followers in resisting the takeover of their sect by the Governance Council and has therefore been harassed constantly by authorities. She has filed several reports of abuse by the government to different United Nations agencies, and it is my understanding that her house is surrounded by police.
Và cũng là thành viên trong Hội đồng Liên tôn Việt Nam. Xin lỗi quý vị, trong Ủy hội Nhân quyền Tom Lanford, tôi không thể đến để điều trần được vì việc đi lại của tôi đang bị chính quyền kiểm soát.
Honorable members of Combat for Human Rights Committee, I am Nguyễn Quốc, a Cao Dai subsidiary and acting female head of the Jothang religious district, a Động religious region. I am also the secretary of of the Representative Committee of Popular Thought of the Cao Dai Tây Holy See, as well as a member of the Vietnamese Interfaith Council. I would like to apologize to members of the committee for not able to come to the hearing because my movement has been severely restricted by the Vietnamese government.
Kính thưa quý vị, gia đình tôi theo đạo Cao Đài nên tôi theo đạo từ năm 23 tuổi. Trước tháng 4 1975, chúng tôi hành đạo tự do, không có sự can thiệp của chính phủ. Nhưng sau 1975, dưới nhà nước Cộng sản Việt Nam, chúng tôi không còn được tự do hành đạo nữa. Những chức sắc và tín đồ các tôn giáo khác cũng cùng chung cảnh ngộ.
Ladies and gentlemen, my family follows Cao Dai religion, and I have been a Cao Daist since I was 23 years old. Prior to April 1975, we practiced our faith without government interference. However, under the communist government, we are no longer free to practice our faith, which is similar to the clergy members and followers of other religions.
Năm 1979, Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam đã giải thể Hội Thánh Cao Đài Tòa Thánh Tây Ninh và cơ cấu thành chánh đạo từ trung ương tới địa phương, lập ra hội đồng trưởng quản với sự khống chế của nhà nước. Cấm cơ bút thần linh học là nền tảng của tôn giáo chúng tôi, sửa đổi luật pháp chân truyền của đạo, thay đổi nghi lễ truyền thống, không cho in ấn kinh sách, photocopy, không cho chúng tôi hội họp thượng tượng, không cho truyền đạo, vân vân.
In 1979, the Vietnamese Communist Party disbanded the sacerdotal councils of Cao Dai Tây Holy See and Cao Dai religious administration from the central to local levels and established the government councils under the government control. Spiritism took that nation in the world.
Chúng tôi yêu cầu nhà nước Cộng sản Việt Nam tôn trọng sự độc lập, hành chánh của đạo Cao Đài, tôn trọng pháp lý của đạo Cao Đài chúng tôi, trả lại cho chúng tôi những tài sản thuộc về giáo hội Cao Đài trước 1975 dưới sự giám sát của Liên Hiệp Quốc. Hãy trả tự do vô điều kiện cho tất cả các tù nhân lương tâm đấu tranh cho dân chủ, nhân quyền và tự do tôn giáo. Yêu cầu nhà nước Cộng sản Việt Nam phải tuân theo bản tuyên ngôn quốc tế nhân quyền và những lời cam kết đã hứa trước Hội đồng Nhân quyền Liên Hiệp Quốc, nhất là bây giờ Việt Nam là thành viên trong Hội đồng Liên Hiệp Quốc đó.
We would like to request the Vietnamese Communist government to respect the independence of the Cao Dai religious administration, respect the legalities of our church, and return to us properties that belong to the Cao Dai Church before 1975, under the supervision of the United Nations. Unconditionally release all prisoners of conscience who advocate for democracy, human rights, and religious freedoms. Comply with the Declaration of the UN Human Rights, and the commitment is made to the UN Human Rights Council. Especially now, Vietnam is a member of that UN Council.
Chúng tôi yêu cầu chính phủ Hoa Kỳ và Ủy hội Nhân quyền Tom Lan Tốt hãy cài những điều kiện nhân quyền tiên quyết cho Việt Nam khi gia nhập kinh tế hợp tác xuyên Thái Bình Dương TPP, dùng ảnh hưởng của mình để áp lực nhà nước Cộng sản Việt Nam nhìn nhận một cách hợp pháp những tôn giáo độc lập cổ truyền ở Việt Nam và ngưng can thiệp vào nội bộ tôn giáo.
We would like to request the U.S. government, and especially the Tom Lantos Human Rights Committee, to set the prerequisite human rights condition for Vietnam before they join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We ask you to use your influence to pressure the Vietnamese government to legally recognize the independent traditional religion in Vietnam and stop interfering with our church affairs.
Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam Qua 39 năm nay đã lừa dối người dân Việt Nam, lừa dối thế giới quá nhiều, nói một đường, làm một nẻo.
The Vietnamese Communist government has deceived the Vietnamese people as well as the international communities for 39 years. They have rarely kept their promises.
Kính thưa Ngài Chủ tịch, với sự cho phép của Ngài, tôi muốn đệ trình một số bản báo cáo mà chúng tôi đã chuẩn bị cho Hội đồng Nhân quyền Liên Hợp Quốc để đưa vào hồ sơ của buổi điều trần này. Cảm ơn quý Ngài rất nhiều về sự quan tâm của quý Ngài. Cầu nguyện Đức Thượng Đế ban ân lành cho toàn thể quý vị và Hiệp chủng Quốc Hoa Kỳ. Xin chân thành cảm ơn.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman and the committee, I would like to submit a number of reports that we have prepared for the United Nations Human Rights Council for inclusion into this hearing record. Thank you very much for your consideration. May God bless you and the United States of America. I would like to sincerely thank you.
Done earlier. Thank you very much, and I apologize for both of you. I apologize for both of you. You may proceed. Maybe you should go first, and you, if you can limit it maybe to 5 or 6 minutes each. I think there may be a vote coming up relatively soon, but I appreciate your patience. We felt an obligation, particularly since she has gone through a very difficult time, and the father. But thank you both for your patience. Attorney, please proceed. And your full statement will appear on the record as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, distinguished members of the Commission. My name is Uni Hong, and I'm the Director of Policy Advocacy for Hmong National Development based here in Washington, D.C. I thank you for this opportunity to discuss the plight of Hmong Protestants living in Vietnam's Northwest Highlands and to raise the voices of those that have been persecuted for decades due to their Christian faith. Forced into isolation by the Vietnamese government and shut off from the eyes of the outside world, these voices are not often heard. I'd like to focus my testimony today on the systematic ways that the Vietnamese government suppresses Protestantism in the Hmong community and highlight some of the most recent incidents of persecution, which are ongoing as we speak. Human rights abuses are endemic throughout Vietnam, but are often specifically targeted towards the religious and ethnic minorities that live in Vietnam's remote provinces, including the Hmong, Montagnards, and Khmer Krom. The Hmong residing in Vietnam's Northwest Highlands have been converting to Christianity in large numbers in recent decades. The Vietnamese government has viewed the spread of Christianity among its ethnic minorities as a threat, due to its perception of Christianity as an American religion, in direct conflict with communism and loyalty to the communist government. For groups such as the Hmong, which has unique historic ties to the U.S., this conversion to Christianity has been viewed with particular hostility. The Vietnamese government equates Protestantism with political dissidents and labels religious leaders as separatists, making people of faith vulnerable to a host of very broad laws meant to suppress political dissent. The Vietnamese government has shown that it operates on a double standard when it comes to religious freedoms. Laws that the government touts as an expansion of religious freedoms either are not applied in the remote provinces where ethnic minorities reside, or are used as a tool to actually restrict religious freedoms for these groups. For example, the Vietnamese government often points to an increase in church registrations as proof of the expansion of religious freedoms for its citizens. However, the registration requirement is actually a tool for further limiting the exercise of religion for those groups which the Vietnamese government seeks to suppress. Over 600 Protestant churches have tried to register and seek legal recognition and have either been denied or ignored by government officials. Decree 92, which was put into effect in January 2013, was presented by the government as an advance in religious freedoms. However, rather than expanding protections for religion, Decree 92 further controls religious activities. It requires that a religious organization have 20 years of government-approved operation before it can apply for a higher level of government recognition. This new requirement makes it impossible for groups such as the Hmong Protestants to gain legal status because many have emerged in the past 10 to 15 years. The Vietnamese government, therefore, has set up a system where Hmong Protestants are effectively shut out of the registration process, then violently cracks down on these groups for practicing an unregistered religion. The most recent example of the repression among Protestants is the campaign that the Vietnamese government is currently waging against the followers of Dong Van Minh, a Hmong Christian leader who has advocated for reformed burial practices in the Hmong community. Minh recognized that the traditional burial practice, which included sacrifices of cattle and lengthy rituals, was an economic burden to families who are already struggling to survive. He advocated for reforms to these practices, and many Hmong Christians began building small sheds to store funeral accessories that were used in these new practices and could be shared by the entire village. In response to these reforms, the Vietnamese government has waged an aggressive campaign to force the villagers to go back to the old way of burying their dead and return to their traditional animist belief systems. Provincial authorities began destroying the funeral storage facilities as far back as 2008, with fresh rounds of destruction in 2012 and 2013. Those that attempted to protect the facilities were met with violence. Women were shocked with electric batons, villagers were detained and arrested. In October 2013, a number of Hmong villagers camped out in a park in Hanoi to protest. The police violently dispersed the gathering, using electric batons to shock and beat the protesters. Some of the protesters, including children, had to be hospitalized for their injuries. During October and November 2013, at least 8 Hmong activists who were followers of Minh were arrested as they protested for freedom of religion and belief. In response, the Vietnamese government has continued the destruction of the funeral storage facilities and has prevented the protesters' leader, Dong Van Minh, from receiving critical medical treatment for a serious kidney condition. I'd like to submit for the record pictures which illustrate the destruction of these storage facilities and the subsequent protest, along with some pictures of the victims of the state's violence. You'll see in the pictures the small sheds that the villagers built, them gathering in order to protect the shed, and the destruction that followed, as well as pictures of the protest that the villagers went to Hanoi to protest the destruction of their sheds and the victims of violence. The Vietnamese government continues to impose severe penalties on Minh supporters. Several of Minh's followers have been imprisoned and their trials are ongoing. Less than 2 weeks ago, on March 14, Thuong Van Sang was sentenced to 18 months in jail for building a funeral facility that would accommodate the new burial practices advocated by Minh. Just last week, after Sang's sentencing, some 1,000 Hmong villagers began marching to the court to protest at the upcoming trials and demand religious freedom and respect for their cultural rights. However, many never made it to the trials and were stopped by the police who held them at bay. Less than a week ago, on March 20th, 2 of Minh's supporters were sentenced to 21 months and 15 months in jail, respectively. Another trial for one of Minh's supporters is set for tomorrow, March 27. The persecution of Dong Van Minh's followers is unfortunately but one example of the Vietnamese government's tactics of using violence and brute force to prevent Hmong Christians from practicing their religion and deny them their right to self-determination. Forced renunciations of faith, though technically illegal, are ongoing. In July 2013, a Hmong Christian couple in Lao Cai province was beaten severely for refusing to recant their newly found Christian faith. Hmong Protestants are subjected to arbitrary arrests, detentions, and torture. In March 2013, a Hmong church leader, Hoang Van Nai, was beaten to death in police custody. Many Hmong have fled from the violence and persecution in Vietnam, seeking refuge in Thailand with the UNHCR. According to NGOs on the ground in Bangkok, there are currently over 300 Hmong Christians in Thailand who have fled Vietnam due to the religious persecution they have suffered there. However, out of all of those cases, only 2 Hmong applicants have been granted refugee status, and this after years of advocacy by human rights groups. The rest of the applications for refugee status have all been denied, and would appear to be blanket denials by UNHCR of the refugee claims from ethnic minorities from Vietnam, including the Hmong, Montagnards, and Khmer Krom. The Hmong in Thailand have therefore been left in an extremely desperate and precarious plight, unable to return to Vietnam due to the continued persecution they'll face there, and left vulnerable to deportation and exploitation in Thailand, with no chance at third country resettlement. It's clear that despite Vietnam's increased presence on the international stage, it has failed to make progress in protecting human rights and has in fact continued an alarming trend of increased persecution of Hmong Protestants and other ethnic minorities in its remote provinces. In light of the foregoing, we provide the following recommendations. We urge the administration to redesignate Vietnam as a country of particular concern for its persecution of religious and ethnic minorities. Congress should pass the Vietnam Human Rights Act, which would preclude the U.S. from providing Vietnam with any increase in non-humanitarian assistance unless Vietnam makes substantial progress in improving its human rights record. The U.S. government should call for the immediate release of all prisoners of conscience. The U.S. should ensure that engagement with Vietnam via the Trans-Pacific Partnership be preconditioned on significant improvements in human rights, especially in religious freedoms. Country reports on human rights practices for Vietnam should accurately reflect the continuing and severe repression of politically and religiously active Hmong. And lastly, rather than accepting the Vietnamese government's assertion that an increase in church registrations illustrates an expansion of freedoms, the U.S. government should recognize the registration system for what it is, a tool to further limit the exercise of religion, and should seek to eliminate the registration requirement. Once again, I would like to thank the Commission for this opportunity to highlight the ongoing persecution of Hmong Protestants in Vietnam and for allowing us to raise these voices of those that cannot otherwise be heard. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your testimony. It's very powerful, and I learned a lot. Thank you. Mr. Rongne, would you please proceed?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to briefly and she already covered a lot of the Mountain and Hmong together. My name is Ron Nai. I'm Executive Director of the Mountain Human Rights Organization in North Carolina. I would like to talk about on behalf of
you bring the microphone up just a little bit. You can bring the microphone. Just bring it up. Yeah, that's.
On behalf of the Mountain living in the Central Highland of Vietnam. I would like to thank Mr. Chairman for honor and opportunity to share briefly feeling, experience about the ongoing abuse of religious freedom and human rights abuse in Vietnam. It is sad to report that religious freedom and human rights conditions in Vietnam presently have got most worse for the Mountain for decades. The Article 70 of Vietnam 92 Constitution protect the human rights, protect the religious freedom, but in fact, since 75, there had been no freedom of religion, and the government violated Articles 70 of its own constitution. For the Mountain, the government of Vietnam have a long memory of the war and consider the Mountain as a long-term historical enemy because we fought alongside the French and American during the Vietnam War. And we are the Christian, and we are to honor the land in the Central Highland. After took over the South Vietnam, the government of Vietnam carried out a policy for punishment and discrimination against the Mountain Christian. We also accused the Mountain Protestant be a spy for American CIA and worship American. And so, 1,000 Mountain leaders and Christians only in jail up 12 years. Many the Mountain who live in their ancestral land have been pushed out to the new economic zone so that this land make available for the Vietnamese from the north. Mr. Chairman, the Mountain Church in the Central Highland today divide two groups. One group registered under the government control. Some of the pastors, the Mountain, become the government employee. They use the Mountain pastor and their congregation to watch, report, and spy on each other. Not only in Vietnam, in the US, the same. The registration, the church under the government control, give legitimacy the government, police, monitor, interpret, harass, and imprison suspect demonstration Christian activity. This is not religious freedom. And another group have not registered with the government control are considered outlaw, and the government continue to persecute them. And the two groups of the mafia,
whether it be in China, whether it be in Iraq, and all the passages that are in the Bible about advocating, speaking for, and for the church in the West to be silent on this issue. I mean, we need some Martin Luther Kings in the church.
And if I may just address the issue that the chairman raised earlier in terms of do these religious communities feel abandoned by the U.S. and the answer is a resounding yes. And in terms of the actions that can be taken by the U.S. government, in addition to the legislation that has already been discussed, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the isolation of these communities that Mr. Ney is talking about. And these State Department reports that you alluded to are extremely deficient. And the community groups that come to DC and talk to officials about the severe persecution that is ongoing with their people of faith, oftentimes are not included in those reports. And we have met with the State Department and raised these sources of information and asked why they're not included. And sometimes the response is that, well, these are unconfirmed reports and we don't really have any confirmation. And the question remains, well, efforts need to be made then to confirm this information. And if that information is hidden from outsiders, foreign journalists, and other officials, then that information needs to go in the country conditions report indicating that the Vietnamese government is purposefully hiding these sorts of incidents. And so the impact of having State Department reports that don't adequately reflect the severe persecution that is ongoing in these communities is extremely detrimental to those who are seeking refugee protection. The adjudicators of these applications rely heavily on State Department reports. And if these reports are deficient and are not adequately reflecting the persecution, then that's how these individuals remain without protection and in these extremely precarious positions. And so for those officials that are visiting Vietnam, not just visiting the urban areas, insisting on increased access to those remote areas so that these stories can be heard is extremely important.
That was an excellent point. Thank you for making that point. I know we have to go for a vote, Mr. Chairman, but I just wanted to say thank you. This is actionable material and information that you conveyed to the Lantos Commission. I want to especially thank Ein Joseph Cow. Ein is a great friend. He is constantly, with unbelievable tenacity, pushing all of us to do more for human rights in general and religious freedom in particular in Vietnam. And Dr. Tong from Boat People SOS, I mean, when I became chairman of the Human Rights Committee in 1994, it was Dr. Tong working with Joseph Reese, who is also a staunch and knowledgeable expert on Vietnam, that helped us work on every single initiative that we've undertaken in the subcommittee during all of the last 20 plus years. So thank you to both of them.
I want to second that too, Congressman Gao and Dr. Tong and the Vietnamese community and of course my staff. This has been a good hearing. I wish it could have been full. I wish we had 25 or 30. Bad timing sometime, but I think we will make every effort that we can. And I'm embarrassed to say that you feel that the United States government has abandoned you, particularly of all the help that we received from some of your communities during the Vietnam War. But thank you very much for that. Thank you all for coming. The hearing is adjourned.
Chưa Washington DC, welcome, Human Rights for Vietnam.